set up on. All right. And I'll just introduce y'all at the top. So,
should I be recording now?
No, I'll give you a countdown.
Okay, cool. You ready, Beef?
Yeah, come on, Beef. Look alive. It's big. We're going to be looking for your thoughts on New Girl Beef in a little bit. So
he is really loud. Like he sounds like an air horn, and I'm kind of hoping.
I hope so. The funniest. This will be nice for this live stream, but we did this episode a couple of years ago where we had this guy and he was in Japan and he was talking about A Page of Madness, the silent film.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought that like he was like we had talked to him, we'd done the episode, we were like, oh, thank you, blah blah blah, see ya. And we thought he was done so we started not really shit talking him, but we were laughing because he had a cat in the background that like, so he's like talking about this, psychological silent Japanese movie from the 1920s. And then this cat in the background would just be like, rawr, rawr. It was funny. We weren't angry at it. We were laughing. And so then we were just like shit talking his cat after we thought he had got off the call. He did not get off the call. He was just like, is it still on? Are we still going? And we were like, oh God, shit. Sorry.
Oh no.
You got called out for bullying an innocent cat. Damn.
I felt bad. I was like, we're not like, it was honestly super entertaining. If we could do it again, we'd have the cat, moaning. But so moral of the story is Beef can moan all he wants.
All right. You might regret that, but we'll see what he does.
He looks very comfortable.
Yeah. He's my buddy. He's chill.
I wish I was that comfortable at any time in my entire life.
He loves how it's like really muggy and humid here in Chicago. My other cat, which I had to shut out because he'll be a pain in the ass. We have an air conditioner in our bedroom, and he's like in there because he gets overheated and pants. And Beef just like loves the heat. He's just living.
That's
I want to pet the cat that's like 4,000 miles away from me.
All right, y'all ready?
Yep.
All right, here we go. In 3, 2, 1. And welcome to episode 355 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I am joined today by Logan Kinney and Aster Gilbert.
Hello.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me back.
Well, we had to fight off some fan mail and some, complaints, but, Logan, we'll look past it. There was a lot of feelings after the Scooby-Doo episode.
I know. I cause controversy every time I come on the show.
And Beef. Beef is here as well.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
This is my cat, Beef, for those watching instead of listening.
This is why you have to join the Patreon. You have to watch the stream, and you get to see Beef, who is the most comfortable cat I've ever seen in my life.
He is so chill.
It's absolutely unbelievable how relaxed that cat looks.
Well, on this episode, we got movies that we saw this week, as always, in part 1. And then in part 2, we will be continuing our feel-good queer movie series with 1996's The Birdcage, which might be the most feel-good queer movie of the series, to be honest. There's nothing more feel-good, I feel like, than The Birdcage. But let's go ahead and jump into movies that we saw this week. We're going to kick it off with a couple new releases from Netflix. The first one, I feel like, has been talked about a good amount on the internet, and that is the new, I guess, however you want to describe it, comedy special movie. I feel like it's kind of a movie. By Bo Burnham, titled Inside. For those who are unfamiliar with it, you have Bo Burnham, who's comedian, actor, filmmaker, a lot of different things. But he filmed this comedy special from his guest house. During quarantine. And so he filmed just steadily over the past year during the COVID pandemic. And it's about little under 90 minutes. It's kind of a series of songs, not really any bits, but songs, him kind of just talking a little, pretty candidly about how he is feeling throughout the pandemic. A lot of discussions about his mental health. And then he has songs about like, white women Instagram. So it's a little bit of a mix of everything. I caught it a couple days ago. I'll be honest, I'm not a giant Bo Burnham person. I've seen a couple of his specials prior to this, like Make Happy and a few others. But I'm not a big giant, I'm not a giant Bo. I really probably became most familiar with him whenever 8th Grade came out and that whole tour of things was kind of going on. But I kind of was curious about this just because while I'm not, I'll be honest, not super into what pandemic art is going to look like. We're going to go through this period of like a bunch of movies and television shows and just things in general that are going to be trying to like come to terms with the pandemic in a artful way. I'm not super excited for that, but I also kind of just have a morbid curiosity to see how people, specifically, artists and comedians and people like Bo Burnham are going to be processing it. I'll say on this, it's a very inventive and creative movie. It's, like the ways that he works the camera and the lights and just the editing, like all of that is very intuitive and creative and interesting. But I'm sure we'll get into it. I don't know necessarily if the whole thesis at large necessarily worked for me. A lot of his humor and a lot of the stuff in this is very self-reflexive. He's very aware of like, or at least he tells us he's very aware of like his privilege, being a straight white man, who's also, wealthy because he has a guest home that he's shooting this in. But I don't know, a lot of that stuff didn't necessarily land for me. Logan, I know you saw this as well. What did you make of Bo Burnham's Inside?
Well, it's interesting because I would have considered myself a very, very big Bo Burnham fan until like a couple years ago. I remember I got really into him when Make Happy came out, and 2016 was like maybe the most explicit my depression's ever been, and Make Happy was the thing that I felt most understood what I was going through. Like it was the kind of art I latched onto as like a dependency when I was struggling. And because of that kind of symbiotic relationship with it, it means I can't really look at it objectively. I rewatched it just before I watched Inside, and there's still bits that really work for me, but it's one of those specials that because of the severe weight it had on my life, it makes me kind of miserable to watch or to think about. Because it reminds me of how terrible I felt. Instead of it reminding me of like coming through it and getting stronger and coping, it reminds me of I watched this like 5 times in June of 2016 because I wanted to die. And now I watched Make Happy again before this to kind of get myself in the zone of Bo Burnham and see if this new special could resonate with me differently after like the 5 years that has passed for him, 5 years that has passed for me. And I watched Inside, and the thing that really disappointed me the most about it is that it's the same shit as the last special. It follows the exact same structure. It opens with a series of disconnected bits, songs about his white privilege, songs about certain either musical genres or certain like types of people on the internet, going on for way too long. He's constantly self-reflexive about his own, like you mentioned, he's always like reflecting on the problematic nature of some of his jokes. He's always like doubling back on them as soon as making them. And that leads into, after about 45 minutes to an hour of kind of self-reflective comedy, leading into an existential stretch where not many jokes are told, where the music gets more emotional, where he gets more confrontational with depression and with his own feelings of suicidal thoughts. And it ends with a kind of melancholic and ambiguous ending that should hopefully resonate with the audience. But like that's the thing, is that like when I consider how much I've changed over the last 5 years, I look at Inside and I don't see any difference. I don't see our work that is reinventive, that is a sign of an artist's growth or transformation. And I don't see the kind of exceedingly personal and intimate connection with an audience that I felt he did have with Make Happy. I feel that the artifice of personal art that always comes into it when you're making your own project, because you always have to think, how will this play to a larger audience? How will this play on camera? How can I amplify it to increase emotional resonance, etc., etc.? But I think the best works of personal art either get at the truth so concretely or use artifice in a way that amplifies the emotion on display. And Bro Burnham's insight is kind of caught in the middle. It's trying to reach for the truth, but it's constantly torn between like capturing the real thoughts of his suicidal urges, like talking to the camera straight, or using his overwhelming, like creative yet distracting techniques of a filmmaker that kind of take away from the poignancy of his words. I feel like he's kind of trapped in a cycle of wanting to be more progressive as a filmmaker and wanting to be more vulnerable as an artist. And instead, he just kind of does a bunch of cool DIY tricks while regurgitating his old material.
Yeah.
I found it I didn't care about it very much. I didn't find it very funny, which I think is always a problem when you're watching a stand-up special.
Yeah, comedy special.
It's part of the thing. And I don't know, like I think this is a kind of project that must have been very, very cathartic for him to make. And I am glad that he got to make it. But it's one of those projects like that it feels very harsh to say I don't buy it, because I think that that feels very mean, because it clearly does mean something to him. But I don't think that he's conveying what he thinks he is or what he's hoping to with it.
No, I feel the same way, and I felt bad, I felt bad to a degree, like saying that, because you don't want to necessarily discount somebody's mental health struggle, and I don't think that's what's happening. But I think it's more of it comes from like that's more of an indictment on like just the whole like society as a whole's handling of mental health, that like, because I've seen this is really resonating strongly on like TikTok and places like that. And I think it's because people who are more engaged on TikTok are excited to see kind of like that open dialogue, or somebody just kind of say that, whether it's about mental health or, the different bits that you like, the songs that you mentioned that he has. He has the one with the sock puppet where he's talking about like the how we view history and society as a whole. And like, that was one that I was like, no, I don't necessarily disagree with anything you're saying. And like, I guess there's something kind of interesting on the level that somebody is saying this, in a mass produced product. But I don't know, like at the end, there's still just so many things to your point that like kind of get in the way of that. It's on Netflix. And I don't know if you hung around for the very end, but it provides you like if you're struggling with like mental health thoughts, or if you're still struggling with like thoughts of suicide or things like that, like here's a hotline and here's some resources. And then you click, and then this was something that I didn't initially know, but somebody flagged on Twitter.
Yeah, I saw it too.
Yeah, but like you click on it and it's resources, like mental health resources, but it's all like filtered through other Netflix programs. And so there's just something like so disingenuous of that. And I feel like, so that's why, again, kind of to what you were talking about, like, yes, he's like kind of permeating like a zeitgeist to a degree, but at the same time it's almost like he doesn't, he's struggling with like the two things, and he never really kind of comes to a conclusion or he never comes to head with anything.
It's like, well, it's an interesting point to bring up, because he probably made a lot of money off of this. And not saying the artist shouldn't make money, but with something like this, he probably sold it for like $1 million, maybe. Like, he's a very, I don't know, obviously, but he like a more money than any of us will ever see. He probably made from this. Whereas I think that if it was as vulnerable as it's professed to be, I think he might have just put it on his YouTube or something like that.
Yeah,
just something that I needed to get this out in the world.
Sure.
And instead of it feeling like a very personal document, at times it does feel like more like a product on the algorithm. But with the thing with TikTok is that I think that every generation has the make happy it needs, because I think that there's this kind of resonance with Inside that I had with Make Happy like 5 years ago. And that's great. And I'm glad that it means something to a lot of people. And I'm not trying to like dispel anyone's impact that they've had with it or his own impact in creating it. But I do think that the fact that it's having the exact same reactions as I did 5 years ago isn't a great sign of artistic development. I think that he should be
That's a good
trying
point.
to do more than just the same old shit, but longer and sadder and with less thesis and with less jokes. And like the thing is, like the sock puppet. What I liked about that gag is that there was like a joke at the end of it where he was like torturing the sock puppet. Like he was even after it said all that things, he did like the little thing of like torturing the sock puppet, and it was dumb, but it was like dumb in a way that it's a comedy special. I'm fine with it being dumb. Like it was the only time where I actually felt like he's trying to make people laugh with this. But I don't know. I think that because obviously, like as a white person, like there's always that kind of desire to like prove yourself as like understanding and knowing things and wanting to show that like we're not one of the bad ones, you know?
Sure.
And like I get it, that's an impulse I think all of us have had in different ways. Some embarrassing, hopefully some not as embarrassing. But I think his is embarrassing. I think he's embarrassing about it. I think that he's trying so hard to seem different than the status quo when he is a part of the status quo. Not just because he's white, not just because he's straight, but he's rich and he's an icon. He's a figure.
Yeah.
And he has a role to play in it. And while I do really commend him for bringing up things in history, I think that his constant reliance on within Make Happy did the straight white man song, and in this he brings up like white women's Instagram, like you mentioned, and his own whiteness. I don't think that the work is actually deconstructing him as a white person and what it means to be a white person with his amount of privilege. I think he goes like on the surface with it, but then he goes deeper with other elements. I don't think he coalesces any of his thesis together. Like I think it's disjointed. I'm not saying that I really want to see what Bo Burnham's thoughts on institutional racism are, but I feel like if he wanted to bring up his own whiteness, he could have maybe went a bit further and confronted the fact that maybe he has a career in comedy because of his status, which I don't think he does. And I don't know, like if you're going to be self-reflexive, commit to it, like go completely in and not just do the same old shit. I don't know. Like I watched it and like I gave it like a thumbs up. I gave it like a 3.5 on Letterboxd. But truthfully, by the time it was like halfway through, I was kind of fucking sick of it, and I just kind of wanted it to end. And by the time it actually got to the ending, where it is like he is being incredibly emotional and incredibly vulnerable, I didn't care. I was burned out. I was tired. And like I think that with me personally, this is obviously very, very subjective, but like Bo Burnham was like the first realization that you don't have to love something forever for it to be like important to you. Like I don't need to feel the same way I did when I was like 15 watching Bo Burnham anymore. That's fine. I don't need to feel that way because I'm older now. I've had more life experiences. I've had other artistic experiences and connections. It's not crucial for me to love everything forever. And it's fine to say this meant something to me once, and now there's still this warm nostalgia to it, but I don't need it anymore. And I think that's healthy. And so like when I watched Inside, I saw something that really wasn't for me anymore. That his styling wasn't for me anymore. His comedy wasn't for me anymore. His emotional presentation wasn't for me anymore. And it kind of represented how I've changed in personal writing over the years. Because I remember right when Make Happy came out and I first started getting a Letterboxd following, my entire review process was, I am feeling all these things. These are all the things that I am feeling. This is how my life is. It sucks. And now, like over the course of like 5 years, I still sometimes write those very personal pieces. But like I've mentioned with the nature of artifice, I've thought more about it. I've constructed sentences. I've constructed theses around it. I've went further into it. And I don't think he has. And I don't think he's reckoned with it. And I would like to see what he could maybe do back with a crowd. after this is over, when he's not just
Yeah,
with his own self and his own creative impulses, because sometimes complete isolation as an artist doesn't actually help you at all. But I don't know. I think it's interesting to talk about. It's interesting to think about. I understand why so many people have connected to it. I understand why so many people hate it because it's
sure.
not what they like in comedy, because it's not very funny, and it's just a lot of songs about like how he's sad and all that shit. And like even though it's like when did it come out? Like a week or two ago?
Something like that. It's
Like
pretty
I don't
recent.
remember most of it. Like a lot, like most of the songs are gone, and that's like the thing with Make Happy is I remember every song from that so clearly. Or
Mhm.
even something like Watts, which I've only seen all the way through like once. I still remember that, and I haven't seen it for like 5 years.
Mhm.
Whereas Insight is already kind of fading from my brain. And I don't know. Like I hope that he found peace releasing it. I hope that Netflix made their suicide money off of it, and I don't actually hope that at all. I hope they crash and burn. Um, but like I don't know, like I'm glad it exists for him, for the people that it works with. But I even though I'm not very old, I'm too old for it. Nah.
I feel that. That's it. That's a good way to sum it up. And yeah, I don't know. At the end of the day, the fact that Netflix has a mental health resource, and it's just if you're struggling with depression, you gotta watch this show. I'm just like, fuck
Just
me, just get out
stream
of
Hemlock Grove if you don't
here.
want to die.
Yeah, I'm like, well, maybe you should, if that's going to be the case, maybe I don't know if you should probably reconsider this decision, because they had like 13 reasons why. I'm like, the show that you got in trouble for because you were having suicidal kids in it.
Well, fellas, you ever just make an entire show about a teen girl killing herself, then
Yeah,
show it in vivid detail at the end?
I don't
That's
know. And then
crazy.
put it in your mental health resource.
You don't even put a trigger for it until like a year later. What
Yeah.
the hell is wrong with them?
Well, there you go. On Netflix, you can watch Bo Burnham's Inside. I don't know if you want to after this discussion, but it's there.
Yeah,
We're going to continue on the Netflix train, though, and talk about the latest Snyder piece. I know both of y'all saw it. Would somebody like to give us a little insight into Army of the Dead?
Yeah, I can jump in.
Go for it.
I really loved the movie. I think I'm a Snyder fan. I guess I should out myself in that regard.
Mhm.
But I think what was really interesting is I really love Zack Snyder's DC trilogy. I think it's really amazing.
me too.
But I'm very excited to see where Snyder goes outside of being constrained by other people's intellectual property and having to deal with the kind of studio control over that stuff. So as I was watching Army of the Dead, excuse me, at on the one hand, it felt like one of his slightest works, like not, I guess, frivolous or light, while at the same time being one of his darkest works and kind of most emotionally resonant. And I think the kind of dichotomy between these two registers makes the film very fascinating to me. And it seems full circle going back to the style of Dawn of the Dead, which I know Snyder said he had written the script for Army of the Dead around the same time that he was making Army of the Dead. And when he made the Netflix deal, the Netflix producer was like, yeah, you got that script, let's make it. Because with his remake of Dawn of the Dead, there is this kind of like tonal incoherent whiplash. Like on some parts it's really ironic, like almost irony poisoned and cynical and crass. But then in other moments, it's really sincere and earnest and somewhat devastating when certain characters die. But when other characters die, it's like a joke or a punchline. And at first I thought that was a fault. Like, he doesn't know how to like modulate his tones. But with Army of the Dead, it seems more like, yeah, he's working through this kind of thematic element where life is simultaneously a joke, but also really endearing and earnest. And so there's a lot in the film, and I've only seen it once, I should say. All the other Snyder films I've seen at least 2 or 3 times, so I have more articulate thoughts on them. But with Army of the Dead, I think taking like Snyder's basic theme in almost all of his movies is a group of people that are knowingly facing down annihilation, and then it's about psychologically and emotionally how they handle that pressure to deal with this kind of annihilation. And I thought it was really interesting in this film where it's much more based on kind of like the hazardous working conditions that people do to make ends meet. You know, like that they're all kind of pressured into doing this risky mission to make money for their families or to reconcile some past thing that they're trying to do. So they all put themselves in harm's way in order to not just like greedily make money, although that's part of it too, right? Let's get that money. But the motivation is often like, yeah, this could like help my daughter, or this can set up this family, or this can help this family get out of this like refugee concentration camp. And so they all put themselves in harm's way. And I think the way Snyder utilizes that and plays with that is really interesting. I also just thought it's really fun. So like the intro, the opening montage sequence, which many people have said is the only good part of the film or the best part of the film. I understand why a lot of people praise that and maybe don't like the rest of the film, because that sequence is incredible. He kind of takes what he did with the opening of The Watchmen and plays with that style in a much more, I think, free form and fluid way. Like, I don't mean to say like this is the film of a free man, because there's, you know, there's stuff in it, but he does seem either unhinged or untethered by a lot of the constraints that have shaped his other films. And I'll stop there so I'm not talking too much. I'd love to hear Logan's thoughts on it, but yeah, I really love the film and I can't wait to revisit it.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that you brought up Dawn of the Dead, because I actually do think that Army of the Dead is basically him fixing the problems with Dawn of the Dead in a lot of the ways. I think it's like, cause I like Dawn of the Dead a lot. I think it's a very good. I'm a big Romero fan. I'm not a biggest fan of Romero's Dawn of the Dead. I much prefer Night of the Living Dead to Dawn.
Wild.
And like,
it's wild to me, Logan.
yeah, I don't quite vibe with the original Dawn's like ambiance and vibe. I don't quite get into it.
That's the whole movie, so yeah.
It's just something. It's something. If you don't really connect with the vibes,
sure,
you struggle to get out of it.
That's true.
But like the same, like I think if Zack Snyder remade Night of the Living Dead, I don't know if it'd go too well for him. But I think with Dawn, he found like a vessel for him to bring out like all of his like garish impulses and like his frenetic style and his like wild swinging ambition to a project. Like you mentioned, it kind of modulates between tones. But the thing that really didn't work for me at Dawn of the Dead when I first saw it is the ending, which is so suddenly bleak and pessimistic and just lacks any tangible hope whatsoever. That like when I saw it when I was younger, I didn't like it. I didn't like how it concluded, because it ended with like a modicum of hope and then immediately shatters it for everyone, just completely brutally. And in Army of the Dead, spoilers, in case you're spoilers, it's the same thing, basically. There's a modicum of hope and then everything's fucked again. There's going to be desolation. There's going to be more death. There's going to be more apocalypse. More people are going to die. The sacrifices you've seen on screen, they don't really mean anything in the long term because they're going to die anyway. That's basically the ostensible conclusion of Army of the Dead. And what I find really interesting is not necessarily the balance between the kind of lightheartedness and the emotion, but the sincere emotion with the more nihilistic, self-destructive aspects of the film. Because it's I think it balances them very well. But it's in certain moments, like, for example, the scene with Dave Bautista and his former love interest, they have this beautiful moment of connection, like where they acknowledge the past and maybe see hope for the future. And then in the next moment, a zombie comes out of an elevator and snaps her neck completely. And in Dawn of the Dead, I think that would have come across as unnecessarily shocking and borderline cruel. But in Army, the balance of sincere emotion with that cruelty, I think makes it work. And I think it's very much benefited by the fact that he's working with Dave Bautista, who is maybe like he is the most like sweetheart human being I've ever seen in my life. Like he's a giant 260-pound teddy bear. And the way that he composes himself in any moment of like sadness with just unabashed sobbing. You feel his chokes in the back of his throat. You see his tears like the tears watering in his eyes. You feel the pain in every inch of him. There's no like suppression of his emotion. The seeing his reaction, I think, helps benefit Snyder's more emotional impulses alongside the bleakness. And I think that's most apparent in the last like 5 minutes, where he gets that majorly emotional and perfect sequence with his daughter, which is obviously very, very emotional considering the real life circumstances of Zack Snyder and his late daughter Autumn. But then it cuts to the basically like with Dawn of the Dead, the post. It's not really post credits, but it kind of functions as the epilogue, where it shows that even though they've nuked Las Vegas, someone has left with a zombie bite. They're heading into Mexico City. It's all fucked. It doesn't matter. And I think that he's a much more complete filmmaker now, and that it works. And I think it also works because at this stage of my life, I think I'm more open to bleakness that still cares about people. Like it might be everything might be fucked, and you might have sacrificed everything for nothing, but you get this like beautiful moment with your daughter before everything happens and starts all over again. And I don't know. I think in a time of like chaos and it feels almost apocalyptic our own lives, there's something kind of weirdly comforting about someone being like, yeah, everything's fucking fucked. Let's shoot a bunch of guns, blow zombies up, and live the best we can with the people we care about until it's all gone. And like, I don't know, like even just like in the more like casual reactions, like the reactions between the interaction between Omari Hardwick's character and the sexy German safecracker Dieter, who is my favorite supporting performance of the year. I love him so much, and I can't wait to see that romantic prequel he directed with the same character, which is coming out either this year or next year, which I can't wait to see. But I don't know. I think that this is a very complete film from him that balances a lot of his impulses, both aesthetically and thematically. And I think it's very fun. I think it's very heartbreaking. I think it's very, very bleak, a lot bleaker than I think a lot of people are giving it credit for. And I don't know. I loved it, and I hope Dave Bautista gets all the best roles with all the best directors for the rest of his career because he's a fucking mega talent.
I completely agree with Logan with what you're saying about Dave Bautista, and I think it speaks to like, you know, there's lots of things I don't think Snyder gets credit for, but one of them is he has a lot of very understated emotional performances in his films. But a lot of people that, you know, detractors, people that don't like Snyder or simply use Snyder as like kind of a low hanging fruit punching bag. I'm not here to convert them. If you don't like his movies, fine.
Yeah.
But I think like because his films are so bombastic and they're filled with this kind of pastiche of different genres and cultural references and iconography, and it's all like in your face, and the tonal changes constantly. I think what gets lost is that in nearly all of his films, there are these very delicate performances of some of his leads, and Dave Bautista's is incredible. It's a lot like I think Affleck in the Batman role in Justice League and in Batman vs Superman, or even the performance of Superman, very understated in his films. And I think like Bautista really carries this movie while it has this ensemble cast. There's just something in his facial expressions, his kind of nuanced reactions to the things that are happening to him that is really incredible. And I think Bautista is really like, I guess he already is an action star, but I'm really looking forward to hopefully a renaissance of Dave Bautista-led action films, because I think more so than other like wrestlers that become action stars, he has a much better range and control over performances than say like The Rock. I'm a big fan of John Cena's films, but I do think Bautista has something that a lot of these other performers don't, and Snyder seems to really pull that out in a way that like the MCU films that Bautista's in, you know, he's kind of a stock character, although he's funny in those films. But that was something in Army of the Dead that I thought was just really incredible. And excuse me, I also, just to layer on some other stuff that I really loved in the film, is I really like that it in terms of like its structure and how it's working, it seemed like Snyder was doing more of what Romero did in Land of the Dead, which I think is a really incredible. I like Romero. I'm a Romero fan. I probably like his Dawn of the Dead much more than Snyder's, to be honest. But
That's probably the reasonable take.
Day of the Dead is my favorite, but Land of the Dead is great as well. And Army of the Dead really feels like this kind of amalgamation of Romero's Dawn of the Dead mixed with James Cameron's Aliens. And a lot of Army of the Dead felt like Aliens. Only instead of aliens, they're zombies, which is fine by me because that's such a kind of iconic plot for an action sci-fi horror movie that, of course, remake it and make it cool. Which is something I'm really excited to go back and kind of watch it again.
With Batista, because like I'm a big wrestling fan. I think this is not a secret to anyone that knows me or has seen my Twitter or read anything I've written for Cinematary.com. I bring it up a lot. And Batista's always proved himself. He always proved himself as a much more he's a much more diverse performer than I think a lot of people initially thought him to be. There's a promo he cut against Rey Mysterio back in 2009 when he turned heel, when he turned bad against Rey, and like he is paranoid. He is like sweating. He is like almost like on the verge of crying as like he can't. He's like so convinced that his friend has betrayed him that he needs to betray him first. And there's this kind of rabid intensity to him. Like he's a guard dog, like being let off his leash. But there's such emotional heartbreak in his posture, in his eyes, in his words, even that it makes the breakup heartbreaking to witness. Even though you know he's gonna murder Rey Mysterio, there's something like he's so talented at that kind of vulnerability. And the thing about his massive size is it often feels like he's like he almost feels like Bruce Banner / the Hulk to me. Like he's trapped in this bigger body. Like he never feels fully comfortable within this kind of like muscle bound physique, even though he's had it for 20 years or more. Like the way he conveys it, like he's always like he's this like quiet little mouse of a man. But yeah, in moments of anger, he has the power and the strength to like beat any opponent, any obstacle. And I think that Zack Snyder fully understands that kind of balance between the power of his body and the kind of more quiet nature of his mind. I think only Blade Runner 2049 got that as well. Because that gets the same thing of he's this brute powerhouse. He could knock people through walls, but he's just like a quiet guy who wants to garden on his own. And I think that what Blade Runner achieved in 10 minutes, Army of the Dead extends to a feature length, which is why I think it's the best performance he's given so far as an actor. And it makes me really, really happy to see him doing well because he is such a talent and because everyone likes him because he's just a very kind man by all accounts. There's no one's ever really had a complaint about him. It's nice to see him like have success, and I hope he finally gets to make his Gears of War movie one day because he really wants to make that movie and he'd be perfect for it.
Good in that role.
So like I don't know, like that the thing with Snyder is I am very excited to see exactly what he does next. I know he wants to make this like indie movie in South America, which he mentioned in an interview. He wants to make this like really low budget thing. And I'd be really interested to see how he approaches a low budget because he's never had one with a feature before because he started right off with Dawn of the Dead. So it's very interesting. And I'm very, very excited to see who he chooses to work with next because I'm sure there's going to be so many people that want to work with him. And I think the future is very bright for him, especially following how generally well received the Snyder Cut was. Like people seem to really like it, not just the diehards, but I think a lot of people that were maybe skeptical of his existence or skeptical of his fans, I think really did enjoy it. So it feels like a real like bright, like there's like a lot of light on the horizon for his filmmaking career, which makes me very, very happy as a big fan of his.
If I could quickly pull together some of these threads that I just want to mention is like I think part of what makes Snyder so good of a of a director for Batista specifically is that Snyder is a very physical director, and he's great at physicality. And I think this also gets dismissed a lot in the stock criticisms, because post Dawn of the Dead, his films have mostly been CGI, green screen, like heavy effects films. But even in films like 300 and Watchmen, but especially in Army of the Dead, he's really great at these kind of spatial relations as they relate to the physical body and the movement of the physical body, which I think is partly why he uses slow motion so well. Another thing, like, people like to dunk on that, but I think it's great, especially in the DC trilogy. But with Batista in Army of the Dead, I think Snyder's ability to kind of think spatially, whether he's working with real sets and locations or this kind of totally green screen world, he's really great at orienting that for the films that he makes. And I think that's one of the interesting things with Dawn of the Dead is I don't think his Dawn of the Dead, he has a fully developed style yet. It feels a little bit more reliant on like what Paul W.S. Anderson was doing with the first Resident Evil film. And that's not a knock. I love his Dawn of the Dead, but I'd really love to see what he does with a low budget film, because he is so good at that physicality, and to see it completely removed from like a CGI slugfest might be very interesting. His superhero films, the DC films in particular, I think there's a really great sense of physical groundedness in these movies.
The last thing I'll say, because my favorite Zack Snyder film is actually Man of Steel, because I think it gets that balance between like the spatial resonance that Superman finds, whether it's he's touching the ice on the ground or like being smashed through a building. You feel like the entire like broad spectrum of physical feeling through a character that feels so much and at all times, like whether like not necessarily pain, but like that kind of significance of weight around him. Like he is constantly overwhelmed and burdened by his brain, by his perceptions, by everything around him. And you feel that like pain and that discomfort. And it makes the moments where he like touches the ground and feels like joy and is able to like flow through the air. I think Zack Snyder is maybe the only director I've ever seen who actually captures what it might feel like to fly. Like watching Superman go through the sky. I never feel like I'm watching just a guy in CG with a cape going, oh, I feel like I'm watching a man leap off of the ground and take flight. And I think that kind of like awe-inspiring connection he has to the body and the mind as well is something that really resonates with me. Not just like as an autistic person, but just as someone who enjoys a lot of intense physicality, which is why I love wrestling so much. Zack Snyder, maybe make a wrestling movie at some point. I'd like to see that. I think that'd be very interesting. But I don't know. I think the Army of the Dead does kind of capture that mostly through the lens of Batista. But I think people like Hardwick, they get their moments of like spatial awareness as well and physicality. But I would love to see Batista become like the De Niro to Scorsese, and Batista's just in everything he makes from now on. Like I think that'd be great. I think he'd get great work out of him.
Well, Dave Bautista's clearly not going to go hang out with Marvel anymore because he doesn't seem super thrilled with them.
I mean,
good for him.
I'm sure they'll pay him a lot of money.
Yeah. Well, Army of the Dead is also on Netflix, so you can check it out there. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back talking about the Birdcage after this. All right. So
I'll save that now.
All right, so I've paused my recording.
Cool.
And then do I hit the record button again to start it back up, or hit play?
I think play.
Okay.
I'm just gonna save it. I'm just gonna do it as two different files.
That's fine. Yeah, I haven't watched Army of the Dead yet, but I think I'm going to at some point. It's because it's a little. It's 2.5.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel that long. I mean,
I think
I'm saying this as a
the
fan.
runtime. Yeah.
Sure. No, it's fun. No, it's just I've been trying to like go. All right, let's set some time. I don't want to be like after work and be tired. I feel like I'll like it though.
If it's any help, like my friend is like my best friend Greg is maybe the biggest Snyder like agnostic I know, and he liked Army of the Dead.
Okay,
So
that's a good way of describing me. Is a
I wasn't expecting Army
agnostic.
of the Dead to be the one that won him over. Like
Mhm.
I would have thought that he would have hated it, but he did like it. So I'm hoping that that might be the case for a lot of people.
Gotcha.
I think that like with Snyder, I think more people are just even if they don't like his movies, are just kind of accepting that he's just a fucking cool dude. Like he never did anything wrong. Like he's a consummate professional. He loves his family.
Mhm.
Everyone loves working with him. He's handsome. Like people just like he just got great vibes. I think that people are like the kind of like backlash against him. I think was really unfair in a lot of ways. Like regardless of thoughts on his movies, I think it was very personal and cruel by a lot of people. And I'm glad that that seems to mostly be disappearing now that the Snyder cuts out. Now that he's like doing his own thing, and people can just like, ignore it if they don't want to see it.
Well,
I
it
feel like
seems and it
easier
seems
to
strange.
ignore
It
now.
seems yeah. Well, it seems strange to me. Like somebody because I saw the trailer for the Suicide Squad movie, the James Gunn one, and it's just kind of ironic to well, not really ironic. I feel like I have a pretty firm hand on why people are much more accepting of James Gunn compared to Zack Snyder. James Gunn seems much more fastball down the middle, like just kind of straight laced. That's why he worked with Marvel and DC. He was able to work with those giant corporations and make those types of movies compared to Snyder, who I feel like kind of wants to do his own thing, whether that's good or bad.
Mhm.
In interviews, it's interesting because I was watching this one where Snyder was saying like, for whatever reason, Warner Brothers like they treated me like I was being an asshole to them, and like I was trying really hard not to be. Like I wasn't trying to be difficult. I was trying to make a sweet movie for them, and they just like seemed hell bent on like being mad at whatever I did.
Thing about the Snyder cut that's so weird to me is it's not like abrasive or anything. It's not like he's like going completely nuts. It's just a well told 4 hour movie. It's got a lot of emotion and character and is very well structured. And they just cut it up for no reason and reshot it. Like
Yeah,
Made
it's
Joss
crazy
Whedon
because it
get
really
involved.
backfired on them. They had to spend way more money in the long run because everyone got pissed at them. Like I don't know. Like I think like, it's just I just a monumental fuck up like the Whedon thing. It's just
Mhm.
like none of that has aged well for them because like number one, Whedon got canceled like right after. Like
Yeah.
number two, everyone hated the Whedon cut. It didn't make anywhere near the money they thought they were gonna make, and they had to deal with fans like campaigning at every social media event of theirs for the next 2.5 years until they were like, "Fine, here's $80 million more to finish the thing." Like it really just backfired in every way for Warner Brothers. Kind of like the Tenant thing backfired on them as well. Like they've had a rough go at it these last few years.
Hmm.
What do you think is going to happen with Space Jam: A New Legacy? You think that's going to backfire on them too?
Fuck man. We did an episode a couple weeks ago, and I was like, hey, and it was I think Andrew and Michael were on, and I was like, have you guys seen the Space Jam 2 trailer? And they were like, no. And I was like, you got to watch the Space Jam 2 trailer because that thing looks like a flaming pile of God only knows what. I've already claimed it for the reviews, so I'm excited to dig in on Space Jam 2.
I feel like Zendaya as Lola Bunny. That's what I feel like truly. She's
Yeah.
like, okay. I like Zendaya, or I used to like Zendaya, but from that clip I saw of her as Lola Bunny, she's going to be giving the two worst performances of 2021 with this and Malcolm and Marie, which she's
Oh, yeah.
terrible in. So Zendaya, and if Euphoria season 2 drops, she'll probably suck in that too. So, and also she's bad in the spy. Maybe she's bad. Maybe she's just bad. I think that's what I'm coming to the conclusion on.
Yeah, I think she just might not think she's a good actress.
I think I'm anti Zendaya. I think I've been deceived because I'm attracted to her. Oh no,
That
It's
happens. I get that.
who did I think was a good actor because I thought they were handsome. It was someone vaguely recently. Let me think about it.
I'm trying to think. I'm sure I have an example of that, but that's a thing.
Yeah, there's definitely a couple.
That's a whole list is actors and actresses that you
that might
think are
actually be
attractive, so you
bad.
go, they're just not a good actor. Just not good.
I'm thankful that it's not the case for John Bernthal, who proves that he's better than I think he is
Dude,
every time he
I
comes on.
love John
I
Barenthal.
love him so much because like he's my biggest man crush in the world.
Has John Barenthal been in a Zack Snyder movie? He feels like he'd be good in a Zack Snyder movie.
He should be. Like,
yeah,
that he should be. Like, he's in the new Taylor Sheridan, which is fine. But like, he is so good in the new Taylor Sheridan. Like, he's incredible in it. The whole movie should have been about him instead of about Angelina Jolie, who does absolutely nothing in the movie.
Oh, the firefighter movie,
the firefighter one. I liked it because I thought it had some cool environments, and I really loved Bernthal in it. But she's like a non-entity in it, which is surprising because I really like Angelina.
Yeah,
but like he's so good. Like,
I might have to check it out just for John, because I love John Barry. Like, he's one of those where I would see him and stuff, and I'm just like, this dude's really fucking entertaining. Why did they not?
He's great. He's such a great actor. Okay, I realized who I was thinking of. Does everyone remember Finn Whetrock from The Big Short?
Yeah.
So I was convinced that he was like, cause I was convinced because I think he's really good in The Big Short. And then for like 5 years, every time I saw him, he was terrible. But I was still like, he's just really hot, so it doesn't matter. But finally this year, he gave another good performance, his second. So I can reclaim him again because he's in this little like sci-fi romance movie called Long Weekend, which I think is really great and really underrated.
Oh yeah, I know who that guy is. He's in American Horror Story, which I do not like, but thought he was pretty good in.
Oh yeah, American Horror. I watched all of Murder House in one day with an ex, and it's fucking terrible.
Yeah, I hate Ryan Murphy. I avoid his stuff sight unseen.
So fun story. During the American election of 2020 in November, because me and my friend were both European, so we pulled an all-nighter, and it was at the point where everything looked very, very bleak. And we were just like very pessimistic because we'd been through it in 2016. So we were just like, so he was just like, "Do you want to watch Glee?" And I was like, "I've never seen Glee." And he was like, "I'm going to show you the Bloodlines episode of Glee." And so as like results were coming in across the country, we watched Will Schuester dance to Bloodlines in the high school corridor, and it honestly, like, it recontextualized my entire life because I realized that this happened under Obama. Everything is always bad, and it doesn't matter who wins because Glee will still exist and Ryan Murphy will still keep producing content. And that really recontextualized everything. So that was a real like wake up call. Like, I don't have to. It doesn't really matter what happens because they're not. Neither of these old fucking assholes are going to stop Ryan Murphy from making like Halston or Hollywood or Ratchet or whatever fucking shit he's put out now.
If you were Bo Burnham, you'd be singing. This would be a song right now.
Oh yeah, no. I should start playing my basic keyboard melodies.
Yeah. All right, y'all want to talk about the Birdcage?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's do it. Is there a structure for that conversation? We'll just kind of go into it.
We'll just kind of go into it. I can kind of bounce this around to stuff.
Sweet, sounds good.
I got some points that we can kind of work off of.
Perfect.
All right, here we go. In 3.
Wait, hold on a second.
Oh, you're good.
Yeah, I just need to get the voice recorder back up.
Yeah, you're good.
It's done a thing. Okay, there we go.
All right. In 3, 2, 1. And we're back with part 2 of episode 355 of Cinematary. In this part, we will be continuing our feel-good queer movie series with 1996's The Birdcage. Directed by Mike Nichols from a script by Elaine May, the film stars Robin Williams, Nathan Lane, Gene Hackman, Diane Wiest, Dan Futterman, Calista Flockhart, and Hank Azaria. It's a remake of the classic French farce La Cage, Affolay. And it's about engaged couple Val Goldman and Barbara Keeley, who shakily introduce their future in-laws. Val's father, Armand, a gay Miami drag club owner, pretends to be straight and attempts to hide his relationship with Albert, his life partner and the club's flamboyant star attraction, so as to please Barbara's father, controversial Republican Senator Kevin Keeley. When Nichols saw the original movie in 1978, he thought it would make a great American movie about family. From the beginning, it was planned to be the first on-screen collaboration for him and his former comedy partner, Elaine May. Quote, "We've never done a movie from first to last together," he said. "This is a project we've wanted to do for 15 years because we knew from the first that it was a timeless comedy with a terrific plot and a wonderful ending. We went through the story many times before Elaine wrote it, and it was exciting to remember the joy of just being funny together. We bring out the best in each other." Initially, Steve Martin was going to play Armand with Robin Williams playing Albert, but scheduling conflicts on Martin's end prevented that. On picking Robin Williams for the role, Nichols said, quote, "It goes without saying that Robin is a wonderful actor, and the story required someone with Robin's unlimited resources at the center of it. What I wanted in Armand was a kind of suppressed hysteria, someone who could appear perfectly straight and ordinary, but with a little something just under the surface that he can't completely control. Robin played that brilliantly. He's funny all the way through, but funny in a controlled way." On picking Nathan Lane for the role of Albert, Nichols said, quote, "Nathan is brilliant and hilarious, and he can keep up with Robin, no easy feat. You can see him thinking, which is the mark of a fine movie actor. He made everything about Albert very real and still very funny. Nathan throws the drag aspect of the character away for the most part. It was more about creating a whole person. At the heart of it was the partnership of Robin and Nathan. They loved each other, and it was great to see." Hank Azaria was originally going to just play Albert's dresser, but had his role expand as the production went on. At the same time as he was filming his role in The Birdcage, he was also filming his role in Michael Mann's Heat, which I just like the dissonance of Heat and Birdcage, which is nice. Three songs were for the movie were written by Stephen Sondheim, and they were adapted and arranged for the film by composer Jonathan Tunick. The song that Albert rehearses during the sequence with the gum-chewing dancer is entitled "Little Dream." It was written specifically for use in the film. Albert's first song as Starina is "Can That Boy Foxtrot," cut from Sondheim's Follies. And the song that Armand and Catherine sing and dance to in her office, "Love Is in the Air," had been intended as the opening number for the musical A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Forum in 1962. And this movie did pretty well at the box office. I thought it was interesting. It grossed $185 million worldwide. The Washington Post in 1996 said, "If The Birdcage isn't exactly the Mike Nichols Elaine May movie of our dreams, it does manage to transform what was formerly a campy bit of French fluff into one of the loopiest, most hysterical family values movies ever made." The New York Times in 1996 said the Birdcage might seem an odd occasion to find Mr. Williams playing things straight, but this is one of his most cohesive and least antic performances. It's also a mischievously funny one. He does a fine job of integrating gag lines with semi-serious acting, all the while modeling a delirious, silky wardrobe with the emphasis on nightmare prints. Mr. Lane in the campier role gives a solid but broad performance without the coy gentility that made Mikhail Sorolla funnier in French, but he has nice legs and looks good in pearls. And Roger Ebert in 1996 said, "What makes Mike Nichols' version more than just a retread is good casting in the key roles and a wicked screenplay by Elaine May, who keeps the original story but adds little zingers here and there." So on that note, let's talk a little bit about The Birdcage. This is probably the third time that I've seen this. Liked it every time. It's a highly enjoyable movie. But Aster, let me start with you. What's your history with The Birdcage? What do you make of it?
Yeah. So The Birdcage came out in 1996. I was 10 that year, and I saw it around that time, not in theaters, but whenever it was out on video. So 96, 97, I would have been 10 or 11. And for me, the film is pretty formative. So I have a pretty long and rich history of loving this film. For me, not to be like too navel-gazy with my own history, but I grew up in a pretty isolated rural community out in the country. I didn't grow up on a farm, but I grew up surrounded by farms. We had terrestrial antenna, which not cable television. Didn't have the internet until like I was in high school, in the early 2000s. And The Birdcage was my introduction to a gay world, not just gay characters. So like like a gay life to live. And so I remember that making a pretty indelible mark on me. Apart from it just being very funny and comforting in a strange way, there are also like problematic aspects that we can pick apart and talk about. But seeing that movie at a very young age, it was also, along with Tu Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, were kind of the first films of like gender fluidity and drag, cross-dressing, gender performance. Not that I would have that language as a 10-year-old in rural Michigan in 1996, but the film really introduced that stuff to me. And so it's been a part of my life since then, always kind of coming back to it. It's one of those films that whenever it's on TV, I'll just kind of plop down and watch it wherever it's at. It was, pretty popular in my household, I think because of Robin Williams' star power, who, being a kid in the 1990s, Robin Williams, along with like Jim Carrey, was the universe of like kid movies, but also like teenage, older, maybe grosser movies that you wanted to see because they were in it. So that really was my introduction to the Birdcage. And then, of course, I watched it again for the millionth time the other day in preparation for this podcast. But yeah, the long and the short of it is, it's, one of those formative movies that indelibly changed me as a child and probably set me on the path of understanding my own sexuality and my own gender, because parts of that movie have just lived with me forever. So I think that's pretty interesting, considering a lot of the people involved in the film are straight and not gay or not drag performers, although some are. So it's kind of this weird blend of actual gay people and straight people making a movie about gay people. But yeah, I'll stop there. But yeah, that's kind of my history with the film.
It's funny that you mentioned like if it's on, you'll like plop down and just watch it, because I saw a quote from Paul Thomas Anderson, who said he has 2 movies he'll do that with. It's The Shining and The Birdcage, which I like.
I read that the other day, gathering my notes, and I was like, and I'm not a huge Paul Thomas Anderson fan, but I was like, all right, PTA.
And what a combo as well. Now, is this something, and this is something we can kind of dig into more as we go along, but I feel like this is also a movie that can kind of play pretty broadly with audiences. I mean, like I said, that's why I mentioned it made $185 million worldwide. Like, it did well at the box office. It wasn't like some little sleeper movie that kind of got pushed over. I mean, for you, like, did it play like well with your family? Was this something, I don't, not necessarily it's like generating a conversation after, but it's like, I don't know what, on your upbringing, but like, was it something that your dad, your mom, and whoever could like watch this and still like laugh and enjoy it without kind of getting sucked into, I mean, sorry, for lack of a better word, like the gayness of it?
Yeah, so like my family was pretty progressive as working class, like lower working class liberal people. But the thing, is a lot of open-minded, quote unquote, progressive people still kind of heavily police gender and sexuality. So it's like, we want you to be whoever you are. But, if I acted too kind of faggy, it was like, don't act like that. So it's this weird kind of contradiction between families kind of supporting me, but then also being pretty critical of certain like queer elements. So seeing it as a movie, my parents were not very, they didn't really censor what I saw. I was able to see a lot of stuff that my other friends weren't. The Simpsons was a weird big one where like, that was a family ritual in my house, was every Wednesday night on Fox watching Married with Children and The Simpsons. And, other members of my family and like parents at school were scandalized by that. Like,
that was censored for me. Yeah, I couldn't watch The Simpsons.
Yeah, most people were. So I think like seeing that kind of madcap comedy with these bankable stars, especially Robin Williams, who I think it's really inspired casting, having Robin Williams in this film, because it brought the gayness of this drag world into households that I don't think I don't know that anyone in my family knew that Paris is Burning was a film, right? Sure. Or wouldn't be able to name like Greg Araki or Gus Van Sant until, Good Will Hunting was made. So even though the 90s by 1996 was still the new queer cinema of the 80s was
Mhm.
blooming, and there's so much great queer cinema from, I think The Watermelon Woman is also 1996.
Yeah.
That's an incredible film. These things
Great
were
movie.
not, yeah, these were not on our radar because we didn't have the internet, we didn't have cable. We went to Blockbuster, and in my small town, there was a place called the Video Barn, which is literally a red antique barn filled with VHS tapes. So
Yeah.
whatever they could get was kind of what we were exposed to. And so my family, my mom and dad were both very adventurous film watchers. I don't think they would know the word cinephile. And, the kind of most far out filmmaker was probably someone like Woody Allen or Stanley Kubrick or something like that. The things, the things that broke through that were still kind of indie but mainstream, we would have been exposed to. So I think, any kind of Robin Williams comedy was, gold in our household. And also the film is just so charming and warm. And also with, my parents being kind of dyed-in-the-wool Democrats, seeing the lampooning of the moral majority, which they were really disgusted by in the 80s and 90s, the Jerry Falwell type characters who were, many of these Republican senators were, hypocrites, which the film does a really good job of criticizing that stuff and throwing that stuff out there. So with the Gene Hackman and Diane Weiss characters, so me being 10 or 11, I can't really recall what their initial responses were, but it was part of this continuum of Robin Williams family entertainment that we all loved. Mrs. Doubtfire, The Nutty Professor, Toys was a weird one that I was really into that kind of creeped me out, but I was fascinated by. Jumanji, like this stuff was just constantly on play. And the Birdcage, I think because of Robin Williams, was just part of that landscape, that ecosystem of, I guess, content we would call it now, but films that we watched and rewatched and returned to over and over again.
Yeah. Okay. No, and that's why I'm kind of interested, because it's a movie that I've watched. I watched it with my youngest brother and my mom, and they like enjoyed it. And I wouldn't say that they're like, they're relatively progressive, probably on the same level as you're describing with your parents. But at the same time, it's not like they're gonna actively seek out a movie that has drag characters and be like, yeah, let's watch this, like let's do it. And so it's kind of always interesting to me just how well this kind of can play across the board, while also kind of keeping true to kind of its spirit that it's going for as well. Logan, I'm interested for you. This was your first time watching The Birdcage. I mean, what were your impressions seeing this for the first time, and kind of seeing all the varied performances from Robin Williams to Nathan Lane to Hank Azaria and on?
Yeah, I mean, like the reason why I watched The Birdcage is because I got messaged and said, "Hey, doing The Birdcage. You want to come on?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure. I'll watch The Birdcage." So it really is, that is the brunt of my experience going in. I've seen plenty of Mike Nichols films, obviously. Even like recently, I saw Heartburn, which I didn't really like, but I saw Postcards from the Edge, which I absolutely adored. It's one of the best things I've seen this year. So I was like, I was in the mood to watch Mike Nichols. I have no real context with the time it came out because I was not alive in 1996. So I have no comment on how it affected the climate of cinephiles. Sure. And kind of how Robin Williams kind of shifted the foundations a little bit with his performance and his inclusion in this narrative. But I can say that watching him in this film was a real joy. It's always pleasant for me to see Robin. He always brings very fond associations with me. Like you mentioned, Jim Carrey was my real childhood like obsession when it came to comedy. Like I would watch everything Jim Carrey was in, and it wasn't really the same. Robin Williams was a little bit later in life, and by later I mean like 11 or 12 was when I first started watching the Robin Williams classics. I saw Good Will Hunting, which really changed me in a lot of ways. But I really started appreciating him even more after he passed. So there's still plenty of Robin Williams films I haven't seen, and The Birdcage is maybe the most knowable of my blind spots. And it was really, really special to watch him. Obviously, still kind of masterful as a comedian, masterful as a comedic presence, but that kind of the way he's toned down in comparison to practically everyone else around him was a very interesting dynamic. I'd never really seen him play in an outright comedy before because he was so talented as like an outright bombastic improv comedian. So seeing him kind of play the more understated of the two between him and Nathan Lane was very interesting, and I like because I read that he was meant to have the Nathan Lane part, but he requested to get the part he plays now, and I think that's the best call because I think it not only gives a spotlight for him, but it gives a perfect spotlight for Nathan Lane, who is absolutely stupendous in the film and is my favorite part of the movie. Um, not just because he's very funny, which he obviously is. He's incredibly funny. But what we'll get into a little bit later is the way that, like, when he starts pretending to be straight in like the scene where he comes in the suit, he looks agonized. Like he's desperately trying to perform. And while there's a gag later on in the scene with like the pink stockings he's wearing underneath the suit, the initial bit of his performance is like he is so desperate to please the people that he loves that he's willing to like suppress his identity again, go back in the closet, even just between his family, and like he's basically trembling with the implications that creates for him, and it really got me emotionally, and especially because he wasn't out at the time while making the Birdcage, which might seem a bit wild in hindsight considering how gay he is in the Birdcage. But I think there's like that kind of added poignancy of this is a scene where he gets to balance the idea of actually what it's like to like go back into the closet, and then he gets to fully embrace the drag queen and gay personas that throughout the rest of the film following this kind of anguish form, which I really liked. What I read about Hank Azaria as well is that his voice is very stereotypically gay, very high pitched, very flamboyant, and he originally conceived a deeper pitched voice while making the character because he was worried about being stereotypical. But he was told by a gay friend that it was more realistic, the high pitched one, so that's why he went with it. Which I thought was very funny. And I think he's very good in this. I've always liked Hank Azaria as a comedic talent. I think it's really funny that on his birthday, he worked till 6 a.m. on Heat. Then he came right over to work on the Birdcage with no sleep. Because you'd never guess that he was ever tired or exhausted because he's got such exuberant energy. And I think every performance is really great. But I want to like quick before we move on to the greater detail of the film. Gene Hackman with Mike Nichols is such an underrated comedic pairing because in Postcards from the Edge, Gene Hackman's in it for about 10 minutes of the overall film. And I would argue that even more than the exceptional work from Streep and McClane, Hackman is the element that really sends Postcards into the next level because he has two fundamentally crucial scenes. One where he's like basically shutting down the Carrie Fisher surrogate for being fucked up and wasting his time and wasting his shot. And his anger is that right balance between hilarious and genuinely like off-putting in the best possible way. And then there's moments where he gets to be like truly kind and compassionate and shows his kind of love and understanding for her, even after all the trouble that she put him through. Like there's just that there's an understanding of Hackman's like intimate side as well as his comedic chops that I think that a lot of directors didn't really capture when he was still an active performer. And I think Mike Nichols is maybe alongside like Wes Anderson with Raw Tenenbaums is that kind of person that gets that balance of how funny and how talented Hackman really is as a comedian. And I think his work, particularly in the second half, is some of the funniest content I've seen in a movie in a long time. I don't tend to laugh at movies much on my own. Like I can find them amusing and I'll be in my head, I'm like, I really like that, or I'll smile. But like it takes a lot to get me to laugh without someone there, like a full-on cackle. Because I guess I'm more of a social animal when it comes to humor. But with the Birdcage with Hackman, there's a gag with Hackman and Nathan Lane about abortions, which I'm sure everyone knows.
Yeah.
That when Nathan Lane responds with the line, about killing the mothers as well, and you just see Hackman being like, no, maybe there's an idea of that. Like he's almost considering it. I had to pause the movie because I was laughing so hard that I couldn't really focus. Like my dad from the other room heard me through the wall because I couldn't hold the laughter back. And I don't know. I think it's an ensemble that's perfectly calibrated for everyone doing exactly what you need to do. The jokes are so smart, and it's not just as simplistic as just being like they're gay. Look at how gay they are. They're queering all over the place. Look at these homos. Like all that stuff that could have been done. Like I don't know if anyone's seen the I think it's 2008 film Sex Drive with James Marsden. Has anyone seen it? And there's like a
No.
whole gag. Basically, James Marsden's entire character is that he calls his brother a faggot all the time, and he's just like, "You're a fag" or "You're a homo." And there's a line where he says, "Look, every guy has thought about fucking another man, but you've got to suppress that shit down. This is America, goddammit." And that is like, and then like he at the end of the scene, he just goes, "Oh, you would like that, wouldn't you, you little homo?" And he goes like super high pitched, like Hank Azaria or Nathan Lane. And in this, and it just like it could have just been as simple as like those kind of obvious, like blatantly homophobic jokes that are both laughing at and laughing with like homophobic people. Instead of that, Elaine May, Mike Nichols, and everyone involved understand that these men are very funny, both like in their presentation and in their like relationships. Like they're not just funny because they're gay or because they're drag queens, although that is a part of the reason why they're funny. I think it understands that yes, it is a factor of why it's so easy to laugh with them and laugh at them, but it is not the only reason they're funny. And I think that balance is really important. It's not just like saying like I think there's some negative criticism of this movie that I think is completely they just didn't watch the movie really at all or didn't really reckon with it. I'm not saying people can't like it, but I think there's a difference between disliking something and just like making an agenda up for it completely. And I think in this case of the Birdcage, this is a movie that is clearly very, very compassionate, even though it's made by a lot of straight people. And I think that it understands the depth of all of its characters, and the performers understand exactly how to do justice to their characters and do justice to the comedy, which is something I think a lot of other actors might not have been able to accomplish. So whoever did the casting for this movie, like, fucking pat yourself on the back. You did a great job. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed the Birdcage.
I think that really is one of the enduring strengths of the film is that the cast is just phenomenal. Like the plot is, pretty basic, doesn't even really matter, who cares. It's mostly a gag to get the scenario rolling. And I think one of the things the film does really well, and I didn't really notice this until rewatching it, is the characters of the kids played by Dan Futterman and Callista Flockhart. They're basically like plot MacGuffins, and they don't take up too much space, which is perfect. Like they're there, they feel like fleshed out characters that are part of the story, but they never like take up too much space, which is great. They just kind of set the ball in motion, and then this amazing cast just kind of takes that ball and runs with it. And I think that's a really smart decision. But like every character that comes into play, like we haven't really talked about Christine Baranski, who is amazing as Dan Futterman's biological mother in the film, and just everyone is firing on all cylinders all of the time, and every scene is this interplay between these different performances, and it's just so inspired. And I think Logan, you're absolutely right about Gene Hackman. I think he's one of the great American actors because he can move from sinister to goofy in like the same beat almost. Like he's so good at that, and his timing is brilliant. And really, him as a comedic actor, I think is used to tremendous effect in this film. So while it really is the Robin Williams, Nathan Lane show, having these other characters, Diane Weiss is brilliant as well. Hank Azaria is incredible. It really is a film that, I mean, there's other elements too, filmmaking elements that I'd love to talk about, but really the cast is what makes this film so brilliant.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Zach. Do you want to go?
Well, I was just going to say real quickly to add to the Gene Hackman point. I think what y'all are describing is best kind of exemplified in the scene where Nathan Lane comes out as the faking as the mother, and Gene Hackman's character starts becoming infatuated with her, and then it shifts into the whole where he has the whole thing where he's talking about like how she's not treated right, and that poor Miss Coleman, like just that whole scene where he's just like angry, but you're laughing at just the absurdity of like what he's described, but he just like has this like deep anger of like, I can't believe that they're treating poor Miss Coleman this way. And there's just something, it's so like he's so angry in that scene that you wouldn't really like think it should be funny, but it's so fucking funny, like the way he's just describing it.
The way he like ignores his wife to flirt with Nathan Lane is so like I did not know that Nathan Lane pretended to be the mother before watching the movie. It's like I had no idea that was going to be what happened.
He incredible. You and Gene Hackman.
Incredible.
When Nathan Lane came out as the mother, I was like, really? Okay. This is very funny. And I didn't see it coming because they kept me distracted enough that I wasn't thinking about what was going to happen next. I was just kind of lost in the moment. But what I was going to say a little earlier was that this might sound like a weird comparison, but the two main actors that like I've always really liked, but I've gained like a new appreciation for in 2021 are Gene Hackman and Warren Beatty. I've been watching a lot of Warren Beatty films recently, and there's something about him that like he's handsome, obviously, like a very beautiful man, but he's handsome in a way that you look at him and it could either be completely hollow or completely sad, like devastating. It's like a Don Draper kind of handsome, where there's either nothing there or whatever is there is just overran by bleakness. Not saying that he's unhappy or hollow in real life. I don't know Warren Beatty, but like as a performer, like that's what he's very good at conveying. Like where it's like in Shampoo, where he's like mostly kind of like dim and stupid and just kind of a horn dog, and then at the end he's just kind of overwhelmed by his own failings and sadness and melancholy. And I feel like watching like him and McCabe and Mrs. Miller or Dick Tracy or The Parallax View, all of which I've seen for the first time recently. I'm going to watch Bullworth very soon.
Oh, that's a good one. I
can't wait. I'm looking Bullworth, Reds, and Heaven Can Wait are my next Beatty experiences. I'm going to rewatch Rules Don't Apply because I'm a big fan of when rules don't apply. But like that kind of thing about Warren Beatty is that I always had an impression of him and I always liked him. But that impression deepened as I saw more of his work in a way that, this might sound very, very simplistic, but I genuinely think that with most actors, you get a real sense of what their whole thing's about after like 3 performances. Like, not saying that they can't do like great work in like 20 different things, but I think you can get an understanding of what kind of things they're going to give, what kind of dimensions they have, what their strengths are. You can get that pretty quickly. Like even with like some of the all-time greats, with Beatty and Hackman, there was more than I gave them credit for. There was more than I was expecting when I looked into their filmographies. There was more that challenged and provoked me and subverted my expectations and made me think a lot about them and their strengths I'd never even really considered before. So like I don't know really why that came out, but there's something about Hackman here and in Postcards, which really, because when I think of Gene Hackman, I think of like he's terrifying. Because he can be really he's terrifying and Unforgiven, which is my favorite performance of his. In The French Connection, he's obviously like magnetic and terrifying in his own like decrepit, dirty way. But here he's not. He's got his intimidation factor like any father-in-law kind of character in an American movie around the period. But his willingness to embrace looking like a buffoon when he's a 2-time Oscar winner and like one of the greatest actors in the world, he did not have to look like a jackass in this movie at all, and he fucking leaned into it completely. Like he gives it everything. When he flirts with Nathan Lane, you believe he wants to fuck Nathan Lane, and that like I'm gonna be real. I don't think Gene Hackman is attracted to Nathan Lane in real life, but I bought it here, like completely. And I think that there's just like that kind of balance of the comedy and the greater depth and like the way that he takes what could have easily just been a caricature and embed it with its own form of life and energy and magnetism is really special. And I think I would have loved to seen both of those men spar off with each other in like a major film. If only I could go back in time and cast them, because Hackman's retired and Warren Beatty's too busy fucking. So
Yeah, they're both busy with many other things. It seems like.
yeah,
One thing to kind of, and this kind of veers us a little bit off, but I think it'll kind of dig into some of the some of the complaints about this movie. But I was thinking about this as we kind of as the series was developed. With a lot of queer cinema, it feels like, and I think this is one of the reasons why Jesse and Paige really wanted to focus on like the feel good movies, is you kind of have the like very serious, important dramas, stuff like Philadelphia, the usually dealing with like the AIDS era, just things like that, where it's very serious. It's not there to kind of necessarily entertain. But then you also have like the farce movies. Like last week we talked about But I'm a Cheerleader. I think the Birdcage fits in that as well. You have those ones that are like the characters are queer, but also like we're gonna kind of almost give you the medicine by making it a little bit more digestible. And so for y'all, I mean, I guess, do you feel like that, like there's like this is able to kind of find a middle ground of those two things without being like one or the other? Or, I mean, does leaning on that kind of farce inhibit the Birdcage at all? Like, do you feel like it's able to kind of present its very queer message while also being a deeply funny movie that's kind of poking fun at its characters, even though it's doing it in a very loving manner?
Absolutely. I think that, well, personally, I should say that I don't think just because a film has serious subject matter that it is good or important.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to dismiss films that take on heavy subjects. I think, what I love about cinema is the diversity and the like full spectrum of human experience and emotion.
Mm-hmm.
To circle back to Zack Snyder when we were talking about the tonal shifts in his movies, like I love that about films. But I think there is this strange attitude, I think, in certain American intellectual circles, that in order for a film to be good, it has to be about a serious subject, and a serious subject is always something heavy. But that means for queer representation in mainstream film, that often means AIDS. It means being murdered by like homophobic violence,
Yeah.
The epidemic of trans murders. And for like queer people, especially queer people of color and poor queer people, like this is an everyday reality. We don't really need to be reminded in the films all the time that this is like the violence underlying kind of social attitudes towards queerness. But I don't think that being kind of farcical or goofy or satirical is necessarily any less substantive. For me personally, I think it's more about the filmmaking. Like, is this a well-made film? Is this a good film? What are the, how am I evaluating whether it's good or bad? Because I think especially in like the Academy Award industrial complex that generates these kind of Oscar bait films, which is often where cisgender and heterosexual people in my life are exposed to queer stories. It's usually through those films. And I often find those films to be really bad, both badly made in terms of like lacking any kind of directorial vision. It didn't seem like there was a passion to make this film. It was just like, conversion therapy. That's a subject that's serious. Let's make a serious film about this.
Danish Girl.
Yeah, and I avoid a lot of those movies for that very reason. It's like, I don't need to be educated on this.
Sure.
So there's this kind of like dual criticism, I'm saying. Like, sometimes those movies aren't even well made, but they're taken more seriously because of the serious subject matter. But also, like, just having serious subject matter makes them more substantive, which I don't think is true. So I think a film like The Birdcage is important queer cinema, or part of the queer conversation because of the world that it shows. And I think the not only like drag culture or just having a normal gay couple that lives together and loves each other and is tender with each other and also has spats and marital disagreements. That was earth-shattering for me when I saw that in 1996 or 97. I had never seen that before. And, there were always gay characters on television, right? There's gay characters on The Simpsons, on Frasier, on Seinfeld, X-Files, all the shit I was watching in the 1990s. Yeah, there were gay characters. Will and Grace didn't come out until the late 90s. But, to see that is important. And just because they're not dealing with AIDS or dealing with homophobic violence or anything doesn't make it less substantive. But I think in having the Gene Hackman character and the moral majority and this kind of like religious right about family values, when the leader of the movement was caught died while having sex with a sex worker, and just that kind of rank hypocrisy that we're still seeing today, right? With people like Matt Gaetz, who is campaigning in this kind of like Trumpian umbrella of evangelical traditional American values. And he's a fucking sex predator. Like he's a disgusting fuck. And so like this hasn't gone away. And so having that represented in this way in the Birdcage, along with kind of normalizing just queer lives and queer cohabitation and living together. And not that it gets it all right or that there aren't things where it's like, I don't know about that, but makes it, I think, a meaningful and substantive film. Sorry, I felt like I kind of carried on about that, but if that answers your question, Zach.
No, it does, because I think, that's why I ask it, because it's like, I think that like Logan was describing earlier, Hank Azaria kind of has this very stereotypical gay character voice, but it's a stereotype because there are people who speak like that, and and again, kind of what he was, what we've been talking about so far with this movie is, I think the thing that endears it, also just being the cast, but I think it goes back to Mike Nichols and Elaine May are very generous and tender with, like, they care about all of these characters, like everybody's cared for. And so it's not like there's a punching bag, like any character really is a punching bag. There's like a care taken with all these characters. And I think that's kind of the difference that you see with this, and what we saw last week with But I'm a Cheerleader. Like those are films that like take care of their characters while also making making comedy out of it. And I think that's kind of differentiates this from, name your kind of token Oscar queer movie.
Yeah, I think what's so important with how we talk about the Birdcage is like something that Aster meant is about context. At the time, like making a movie where like Robin Williams is one of the biggest stars in the world, playing an openly like effeminate gay man who loves his husband, like his partner, because they're not married, because at the time, but like his life partner, and they have a kid together, and they're happy, and that they end up like not having to change themselves permanently for heterosexual cisgendered culture. They get to live as themselves and have fun and enjoy themselves, enjoy their time together, enjoy their space without it being corrupted or killed by the senator. I think there's something really, really hopeful in that for a lot of queer people. It shows, hey, it might be really hard right now, but there is the possibility of like you having a life with your partner and getting to live and have fun and be able to have jokes and just kind of like exist. And I don't know, I think at the time, I think gay communities looked very different in 1996 than they do in like 2021. So like a lot of like people in like the queer community right now might look at this differently because it's 25 years old. I do not, because I think it's very fun and entertaining and joyous. I think it's very compassionate and lovely, but I can understand why it might not resonate with like a lot of modern queers who expect like art from 25 years ago to have the exact same societal progress as we have now, which I think is a very stupid way to look at art. But I do get it, because after like years of seeing gay stereotypes in like sitcoms, I think you can look at someone like Hank Azaria doing that voice and just immediately default to the worst assumption. But I don't know, like when I think of the Birdcage, like in my own sense, like I I am queer. I've been queer. I've been out as queer for years. But it's honestly like I never really connect. There's only a few like the serious gay movies I've ever really connected to. Um, BPM from a few years ago, I really connected to. I really adored. It made me feel very, very joyous about being a queer man. Like I felt really ecstatic after, even with all the sadness after it ended. I felt like euphoric for being queer, which is something I don't really feel very often. Like sexuality to me is just something I am. It's not something I really think about too often. It's not something that really it comes into account obviously due to like societal impressions of me.
Mhm.
But in my own life, my sexuality is just what it is, and I know that's not the case for a lot of people. But for me, like it's just what I am. I don't tend to overthink. Like for example, like I think more about being autistic than I do being bi. Like that's just that it comes into my life more often. There's more things I have to adapt because of it. So like when I see something like the Birdcage, which is not trying to make a serious issue out of just being queer. It's just like these people are gay, and sometimes shit's gonna happen because of that. But most of the time, they're just fucking happy being themselves, and it's
Mhm.
fine, and it's just their lives. And that's nice to me. I like that. I like not having to feel like I don't know, like whenever something like deeply homophobic happens and there's all these people like standing it like all the allies or whatever like standing like yes all the rainbow flags lighting up, sometimes I feel like is that the only time I'm supposed to feel like comforted in just being a queer person is when there's like immense tragedy or suffering or like a display of like extravagant wealth or like rainbow capitalism or whatever. And I kind of feel more like the more time passes, instead of becoming more like free with my sexuality, I've just become more content of just being like it is what it is, I'm bi, it doesn't really come into account. But like when I see something like the Birdcage, I'm like, fuck yeah, this is awesome. Like it's great fun. Like we get to be escapades, we get to be fun. Like I think there's less pressure, especially on queer men, to fulfill traditional masculine roles. I think obviously there is still presence of toxic masculinity within queer men communities, but I think in the case of like Lane and Williams, they have very free reign to interpret masculinity however they choose, whether that's through drag or whether it's like, through Robin Williams. He's very, very gay. He's effeminate, but he's very masculine in his presentation. He has a very rugged mustache. He dresses in very masculine outfits, and that those two things never like contradict the other. They're just his presentation as a man, as a queer man. And I don't know, I think that stuff's really refreshing to see. So in many ways, I think the Birdcage is still very progressive in its depiction of queer men because like I don't know, if I'm given the choice between this and something like Joel Edgerton directing the movie about how gays are sad or whatever, I don't actually mind that movie too much. But like if I was given the choice, I'd be like, yeah, no, I'm taking the Birdcage because it makes being gay, being queer, look like it doesn't suck all the time, and it doesn't suck all the time. So I like it is both a fantasy in its own way, and it does kind of capture something very true and very honest about how sometimes happy queer communities are the thing that keep us breathing completely.
Yeah.
And I don't know. There's too many movies about just a bunch of gay people that just all really like being around each other and make each other's lives better. Like there's not as many as there are like sad gay dramas. And I like a bunch of sad gay dramas. Don't get me wrong, like BPM, or I am actually a really big Philadelphia fan. Like I think Philadelphia is a masterpiece.
Mhm.
But I don't know. I am grateful this movie is as I'm grateful that this movie is as funny as it is, and that it handles its queerness in the way it does, because I think more movies could learn from it when it comes to gay characters in comedies and just like straight people writing about gay characters. Just honestly, like just I would much rather them just say write them like characters, like three-dimensional people, like they breathe and have thoughts that they can exist without just being defined by who they fuck. I think that a lot of the current writing of gay characters by straight people is just very they're trying to like, and I kind of, not to bring it back to Bo Burnham, but in a way they're trying so hard to like look woke that it actually kind of backfires on them a little bit.
Mhm.
I feel that a lot with like modern comedy, like a lot of modern sitcoms having like a gay character, like not to shit on something like Modern Family or whatever, but I think Modern
But
Family,
you're going to.
um, yeah, like the gay couple in Modern Family feels like it could be like something like the Birdcage, but I think it backtracks too much. I think it kind of leans into cliche far too often, and doesn't really give the same development to the gay characters outside of stereotypes as it does for like Ty Burrell and
Yeah.
his wife. And like, I don't know. I think that I'm glad the way the farce works in the Birdcage, and I think it helps amplify the strengths of the writing and the depiction of queerness. And I'm talking myself into liking the movie even more, which is always a good sign.
Um, well, I think the biggest fantasy that you can take out of the Birdcage is affording that type of real estate on South Beach. That's absolutely inconceivable at this point in time. As we wrap up, any quick final thoughts on the Birdcage before we end the episode?
Yeah, I think I guess one quick thing I was thinking about, because Logan talked about this a bit, and I just wanted to throw my thoughts in there, is that I'm not entirely dismissive of contemporary critiques of movies about the problem of straight actors playing gay characters or writing gay stories, or the problem of cisgender actors playing these trans characters, normally for awards and accolades, while there is so many trans and gay actors and also filmmakers, laborers behind the camera that are not getting these jobs. And I think where I see the Birdcage kind of falling through the cracks in this contemporary criticism is this belief that um, you know, things are progressive, so they're naturally better. So anything made before a certain date is problematic and should be dismissed. And I think there are issues with the film, like Hank Azaria, kind of like an Anthony Quinn playing racially ambiguous characters, playing characters of races like he is not Guatemalan. And maybe that is, I think, kind of a problem that he plays a Guatemalan character. But I also think the character is funny. I'm not trying to just dismiss the criticism. But I think, a lot of what Logan said, I really agree with in terms of like, what are these characters? How are they portrayed? What are they doing? I would really love to see what some of the gay, trans, and queer publications of the 1990s, what their film reviews of this film thought, because I'm sure it's a completely different world if you were a member of an adult gay person living a gay life. What did you think of that movie? Because I could totally understand thinking, what is this shit made by like straight people? But for other people coming to it, I think I don't like to divorce the text from the context and dismiss any criticisms of that. But I do think like what this film does as a text, how it represents these characters, what the world that it depicts, and the influence that it has, I don't think can be totally dismissed because Robin Williams wasn't gay playing a gay character. I think when it becomes a kind of black and white criterion, almost like the Bechdel test, pass or fail. Does it do this? Nope. It's bad. It's problematic. I think misses a lot. But also, like, I'm not going to spend my time trying to convince people 15 years younger than me why they should like this movie from 25 years ago. You're lost if you don't like it. Please go ahead.
But to quickly go a bit deeper on one of the points, my argument about like context isn't meant to like dismiss any legitimate criticisms of the Birdcage as a film or as a text within like queer spaces, but I do think it's important to understand that context while taking those criticisms into account. So, for example, if people do have issues, to be perfectly honest, I don't give a absolute shit about if someone's like gay or straight or bi playing a queer character, because it's really none of my business. I really don't care. And like we've seen with people like Lee Pace that come out much later in life, like I don't know if they're queer or not. Like they could be married for 30 years and they could still be bisexual and not tell anyone. I think that the kind of constant pressure for people to come out, or even something like people could be dismissing Nathan Lane at the time for not being gay, even though he was gay, he just wasn't out yet. I think that kind of blatant criticism of like that kind of black and white, as you said, of if the person that plays this character isn't gay exactly, then their performance is problematic and it shouldn't happen. And obviously, it's not that I think gay actors shouldn't get the chance to play more gay roles. Of course I do. Of course I want to see more gay actors get to play gay characters. But I also think that it doesn't reduce the possibility of non-gay actors doing very, very good work as gay characters. I feel very similarly about non-autistic actors playing autistic people. I really don't give a fuck at all as long as it's good and people care. Like, as long as you actually put in effort and try and empathize with the community, you're an actor. If you do your job well enough, I can buy it. I think it's very different if it's like a cisgender man pretending to be a trans woman for award success. I think it's a very different conversation for reasons that I think Aster probably has much more articulate thoughts than I do. Um, but I think in this case, I think judging Robin Williams for trying to do his best to bring some more increased awareness onto a community with a very funny performance, just because he wasn't gay when Nathan Lane was gay, is a bit. It's a little bit much for me. I think it's a little bit redundant.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say that I think like you can hold both things simultaneously, which I think you have to do with a lot of films, a measured critique of the issues and what is problematic, while also an appreciation of how the text functions and what its influence has been. I'm thinking the same of like the conversation around Paris is Burning, the criticism that like Jenny Livingston, the filmmaker, is a white person going into a Black queer space and documenting it. But the audience and the response to that film is very complex. It's not as simple as like, this is a bad movie because a white woman made it, because the film has this legacy and this influence. That is a point of critique, though, that most people that I know who are fans of that film understand that and like balance that thing out. And so I think with the Birdcage, there definitely is a lot of room to talk about these issues. And one that we didn't get to, and I know we're out of time. I don't want to bring up a whole other conversation, but I think the plot point of their shitty son asking them to go into the closet to impress some fucking freak politician is like, that's awful. Fuck this kid. But it's like, it's a really like, and the movie treats it that way too. Like Robin Williams' initial reaction is like, it took me 20 years to figure out who I am. I'm not ashamed, are you? And I'm like, hell yeah. But then the way that the movie is about like the sacrifices and the pain you put yourself through for someone you love, and then having it all kind of explode at the end, while also being this criticism, lampooning of conservative hypocrisy, I think is really interesting. But, that is something where like, I can't imagine being an adult gay person, an adult queer person in the 90s and seeing that, be like, the fucking plot is that the kid asked them to go into the closet. That is horrifying. And it is kind of horrifying. And I can see as like a straight audience, like just, oh yeah, that's just a funny MacGuffin to get the plot rolling. And it kind of is, but I also don't mean to dismiss that kind of sting. But so I think, texts are much more complex than that. And you can also be critical of something and still enjoy it. And I think what makes the Birdcage work is that it is so enjoyable. And there's so many pleasurable, comfortable things about it, while around the margins, it has some of these things where it's like, I don't know, like Callista Flockhart's 17 trying to marry a 20-year-old, like what's going on here? But
that whole orb over there is a little questionable, to be honest.
The kids are the worst part. I mean, Dan Futterman looks like he's 35 playing 20.
He is like 30 in it. Like
he's
like
27, I think. Yeah,
something like that. But like, I don't know. Like personally, not to keep going on. But personally, I do actually think the aspect of them like being asked to go back into the closet and then just completely making a farce out of it completely throughout, constantly, everything going wrong all the time, getting more and more caricature like as the film progresses, until they're just like, fuck it, and they just drop the act and they just completely embrace like the outright like stupendous homos they are. Is actually, I think that the arc of them like facing a life of being in the closet again and like gloriously rejecting it is very wholesome and very like comforting. I think it's, I can understand like initially it being seen as horrifying to some people, but I never really thought of it at all like that way. I thought it clearly understands that the kid's a jackass and that
Total jackass.
that it's stupid for them to actually feel like they need to bring in the woman that just said, I don't really want this kid, so you can just have them, as long as you get money. You give me money and you can have the kid and shit like that. And I don't know. I find that element. I understand why some people might have a problem with it, but personally, I think it understands the weight of its premise, and it understands how important it is with the premise it has to completely fucking lampoon it like as soon as it's incorporated. So I not that there aren't problems with the Birdcage, but the more I talk about the Birdcage, the more inclination I have to defend the Birdcage, which I wasn't expecting completely going into this, because I really liked it, but now I'm like, I want to watch the Birdcage again. I just saw it like 6 hours ago, and I'm like, did I do it? The tab's still open on my laptop. I might just rewatch the Birdcage now.
That seems to
Maybe
be
I
the
am going to
endearing.
talk about Anderson.
Yeah, I was gonna say that seems to be the endearing legacy of the Birdcage, is that if it's gonna be on, you clearly want to just be like, let's watch the part where Gene Hackman's doing this, or let's watch the part where Robin Williams is doing the dance. Like it just seems to be a movie that constantly is working. Oh yeah.
Oh, I was going to say that the opening, I know we didn't have time to talk about the technical aspects, but Emmanuel
Yeah.
Lubezki's cinematography, the opening shot where it's the helicopter moving into the city and then the crane shot, and then it seamlessly moves to the Steadicam shot. That opening, it just like pulls you into its world with the slow music and the lights. It's one of my favorite openings to a movie. Just the way it pulls you in, and then you can just sit there and be in that world. Their apartment above the club with the what is it, like the fern wallpaper. I love that. Like, that's one of my favorite memories from childhood, is like, I want to live in a house that looks like this. but yeah, so it's great to rewatch.
The production design. I keep having more things to say. I'm so sorry, but the production design in this film is gorgeous. Every like location, whether it's like Christine Baranski's like office or their apartment or the club, or even just like outside moments where they're like sitting on the beach. Or
I was gonna say, or like they're at that bus stop, in the film, like the fucking bus stop
in the street, like the street as the credits start rolling. Like it's immaculately designed, and the way that Nichols navigates the frame kind of shows his kind of like strengths of kind of like low key intimate character dramas, like particularly Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which incorporates a very small environment perfectly cinematically. I think he does this very well. There's never any doubt that I am watching a capital M movie, even when it's like it's not constantly flashy. It's not set in a bunch of like technical sets. The camera isn't zooming in all the time. It could like there are like you said with the opening, there are some very impressive technical details, but I think what is most impressive with the movie is how it uses its vibrant sets and the way the actors are located within them, and makes it feel truly cinematic, even with just like minimal like flash to most of it. Like it's hard for me to really describe it. It's just this kind of like, it's like Mike Nichols switched on the genius card that he pulls out 60% of the time, and he delivered, and it's so good. God.
Yeah, it's the really like naturalistic cinematography that counterbalances the flamboyant sets and the flamboyant performances, and I think it makes a very winning combination. Visually, just gorgeous to exist in that world, which I think has always been my attraction since I was 10 or 11.
Yeah. Well, the Birdcage, I think, is pretty readily available. If you have not watched this, it's on
Hulu right now.
It's on Hulu. It's on a number of other streaming services, so it's pretty available, and it's a very, very, very breezy 2-hour watch. So if you've not watched it after listening to us talk about it for almost an hour, you should probably go and watch that.
Watch it.
It's a good movie. I like it.
Well, that will wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter and Instagram at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we post all the movies that we talked about in this episode. Thank you to our patrons at patreon.com/Cinematary. Go there if you'd like to support the show. Thank you to Cam, Chad Newsom, Christina Daughtry, Corey Willingham, Harry Eskin, Candace Sisson, Ron Hayes, Titus Arthur, Tyler Chandler, and Whitney Rio Ross. Thank you so much for your patronage. Next week, we will be continuing our Feel Good Queer Movie series with 2017's Professor Marston and the Wonder Women. So, it's unfortunately this is not a part of the Snyderverse in the DC universe, but it's a whole other thing.
I wish there was some kink in there.
Imagine that. But until then, thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next week. Nice. All right, let me turn this